everybody, it's Eric Pappenfus. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day, and welcome to a special Pawn Stars edition of Buy Day Friday. Because as you're watching this very episode, we are currently in Providence, Rhode Island, taking books from the Midtown Scholar to be evaluated by Rick, Corey, and Chum Lee for an appearance on Pawn Stars. More on that later. But the way Pawn Stars works is they reach out to various people, they invite you to bring things to the show, but you have to write a series of pitches about books that maybe or maybe not will interest them. And they asked me to do a series of pitches for books having to do with revolutionary Boston, one of my favorite topics. And I did just that. And some of them were accepted. We won't tell you about those, but some were rejected. And I thought we'd do a series of buy days about the books that Pawn Stars rejected. And that brings us to where we are today, which is Charlestown, Massachusetts, at the Bunker Hill Monument. A beautiful monument which may remind you a bit of the Washington Monument in D.C., doesn't it, Kathy?
Oh, yes.
Except it's about half the size, a little less than half the size, and it was built before the Washington Monument. So the Washington Monument is really based on the Bunker Hill Monument. It's an obelisk, obviously, and we weren't able to go to the top today because it's too hot, but it's now run by the National Park Service. And I had suggested a book tied to the Battle of Bunker Hill for the guys at Pawn Stars, and I even pitched a whole theme in which maybe Corey would read the book, be moved, want to come to the park, tour the monument, and let's see what you think of my possible story. We're going to get right to it, open the box, and see this incredible book, which was published in Boston in 1774. So first thing you need to know about this book, if you come in, Kathy, is it was written by Andrew Elliott. And Elliott was a pastor of a church in Boston, and he is famous. It was published in 1774, and it's his sermons. But it was owned by a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Smith, who then gave this to his children and passed it down in the family. And Benjamin Smith fought right here at the Battle of Bunker Hill. He was one of 3,500 Patriot soldiers who took part in this battle. Now, I would argue it's possible he read this book on the night of the battle or right before the battle or even during the battle as inspiration, because Andrew Elliott was the pastor of the Congregational Church in Boston. And if you look from the hill here, we're looking across the Charles River down to Boston. And you would have been able to see the steeple of that church in those days. You can't see it today, but we're not far from Boston. And Elliott is famous because he lived in the house of Increase and Cotton Mather, great Puritan ministers. And he decided to stay and stick it out in Boston even after the British occupation. Remember, the British shut down the city of Boston, and part of the reason the Patriots gathered here at the Bunker Hill Monument location is because they were trying to draw them into a battle outside of Boston itself. What I like about Elliott's book is that it really would give inspiration. I think when we went to the museum just now, Kathy, you said to me, boy, those Patriots really thought God was on their side, didn't you?
They did.
And it's so true. And this book is really interesting because it has a whole series of sermons about how Jesus preached to those who were in prison and who were sometimes disobedient. You could see the colonists feeling that they were in a bit of a prison in Boston. And he also had this wonderful sermon here. And look, Benjamin Smith wrote his name on Sermon 9. So maybe this was the sermon he was reading the night of the battle. But this wonderful sermon about how sometimes it takes bloodshed to redeem oneself. I mean, Christ actually had to be killed to redeem the populace. So you could see that giving some inspiration to a soldier on the eve of a battle. Now let's talk about the battle for a second. At the time, this was all pasture. And the first thing you should know about the Battle of Bunker Hill is that we're not on Bunker Hill at all. That's the really strange thing, and it confused the Patriots even then. Bunker Hill is over there. We're on something called Breed's Hill, and they decided to defend Breed's Hill because it was a better place to fortify than Bunker Hill. But you know, hundreds of soldiers went to Bunker Hill because that's where they thought this battle was going to take place. And the Bunker Hill Monument is now today on Breed's Hill. Pretty amazing. But it was all pasture. And there would have been cows grazing and lots of clover. And, you know, is it possible, Kathy, that these four-leaf clovers that are in the middle of the book came from here the night of the battle?
Lucky clovers.
I think we could do some DNA testing on the plant life and see if it matches the clovers. Look, we've got clover right here, still to this day right below us. But nonetheless, the battle was fought, and the Americans end up losing. but they actually win the battle because the British lose too many troops. They realize that the Americans actually are going to stay and fight and not run, and we have our first American martyr, which is General Joseph Warren. And as a result, the Battle of Bunker Hill really makes everyone realize that we're going to be in for a fight, a battle. And this is going to be a long revolution, and no one is going to give up. Well, at any rate, certainly Benjamin Smith fought at the battle. He received a pension after the war, and he eventually moves to Vermont, and he hangs out with his family. But he would have cherished this book and passed it down. And I thought it would be a great book for Pawn Stars because you could tell the story of the monument. And speaking of the monument, I have one other book which I thought was interesting. Come on over here to the box, Cathy. And there's an interesting book here that comes from the Bunker Hill Monument Association. Now, one thing you have to realize is, and this is a pamphlet from our pamphlet room, and remember, we got tons of pamphlets for only $10 or $20 and not that valuable at the Midtown Scholar, but they're all very interesting. This was built, first there was a Masonic monument because General Joseph Warren was a Mason, but eventually after the Revolution, at the 50th anniversary of the American Revolution, they decided to build an obelisk, and they had a contest with lots of different designs, and Lafayette, who was on a tour of America, actually came and laid the cornerstone. And Daniel Webster, the great Boston orator, gave a speech. But then for the next 20 or so years, they couldn't really raise money. So you began to see this monument being built, but it was a bit of an eyesore. And all the people that were living around in the Charlestown area got increasingly frustrated. Eventually, they finish it 20 years later, in like 1843. And Daniel Webster comes back, still going, and gives another speech. But his speech is about how the monument can maybe bring America together. And this is on, the verge of the Great Civil War. And he's really speaking to all Americans and hoping that there won't be secession and the people will come together. And that, of course, doesn't happen. But after the Civil War, the monument does become a place of healing. And for the American Centennial, which happens in 1875 for the Battle of Bunker Hill, both Confederate and Union veterans come together as a part of the monument. And this is interesting because it was built by a monument association. So it's a private monument association. The cover's detached, but you can look at this map and they talk about basically developing a square and creating a proposed street that leads down from the muster fields all the way up to the monument. And that, Cathy, is the street that is right there to our left and leads down the hill. It's just a little bit about history and how we remember and how we determine what the legacy and the history of our sort of national stories are. But after the Civil War, it becomes a place of unity, and to this day, it's still being visited on this beautiful hot summer day by hundreds and hundreds of tourists. Okay, so that was Pawn Star book number 1. We're going to end today with a funny book. I think you're going to find it amusing. We're on the road, aren't we? So I figured,
yes,
what better book for a road trip than a book entitled "What Bird Did That?" Because we've already had some birds do some things on our window on the car, and I figured this would be very helpful. So, Cathy, here is a quiz for you, and we're going to start here with this bird, and I'd like you to tell me. Ready? What bird did that?
I'm going to guess seagull.
No, I'm afraid that was a peregrine falcon. All right. I'll be a little easier. What bird did that? Little tiny
Robin.
No, close though. That would be the hummingbird. And did you know that the great country of New Zealand is the only country in the world to produce postage stamps with bird droppings? I had no idea until I purchased What Bird Did That. A wonderful work for taking on travel with you this summer. All right, well, stay tuned next week and a future week for additional books rejected by our friends at Pawn Stars Do America. More great stories and adventures to come on Buy Day. Please watch next Friday and every Friday for adventures in the world of books.